Hello and welcome to the second video in my Dark Souls Beginner's Guide series. In this video I will be explaining how each of the classes affect the way that you start the game. So without any further ado, let's get this started. Classes in Dark Souls are basically a template for you to build your character off. They don't limit you to how to build your character late game, so after a few hours your class choice becomes redundant. But when you're starting the game, choosing the right class can mean the difference between an easy start and a hard one. And that's why I'm here, to explain to you all about all the different classes and how hard they are to start with. The first class choice is the Warrior, which most players perceive as the easiest class to start with. This is probably because the Warrior is starting with high dexterity and strength. This will make the Warrior easy to use because they'll have a high damage output with both dexterity and strength based weapons early in the game. Coupled with this, with their relatively high armor, it makes a great choice for starting players. The Warrior does have very limited access to magic and miracles at the start of the game though, but with a few skill points into intelligence and attunement and faith, the Warrior can start using basic spells and miracles quite quickly. With all this, the Warrior is a very easy class to start with. The Knight is next, another relatively easy to use class, though for other reasons than the Warrior. The Knight is known as the tank class, and this is due to the fact they start with the highest vitality and defense of all the classes, plus the armor they start with is very good. He doesn't have the same damage output as the Warrior does, but definitely makes up for it with his tankiness. The Knight does start out with slow movement speed, so during fights you'll have to be prepared to take more hits than the other classes do. Choosing the Knight will mean you start out in the Covenant of the White. I'll be covering Covenants in a later video, but starting in this Covenant will not impact your start very much, so don't worry about it. Thanks to its tankiness, the Knight is another very easy class to start with and I highly recommend it. The next class is the Wanderer. Wanderers are another good all-round class, but with a focus on speed and evading rather than high defense. Their vitality is relatively low, and their armor is nothing to write home about, so they can't take many hits. Their high dexterity, coupled with their starting weapon, the scimitar, means they do have a very high damage output early game though. This class isn't a starting class I would recommend. It may have high damage output, but it relies too much on speed and evasion to survive, and that requires a level of skill from the player. So for new players, I would not recommend this class. Next up is the Thief. Think of this as the Wanderer on crack. The Thief starts off with a very high dexterity, the highest of any class, but this comes with a price. They start with a very low vitality, and as such, the class solely relies on being able to dodge almost all attacks. The Thief's starting weapon is the Bandit's Knife, and this is meant for backstabbing or riposting, something I'll get to in a later video. But the Bandit's Knife also causes a bleed effect on enemies, so after a few hits, the enemies will take a huge amount of damage from the knife, causing them to bleed. The Bandit also starts with the Master Key, a key that will open up most locks in the game, and this Master Key is also a starting gift. And so due to the fact that you start with a Master Key, as the Thief you could effectively start with 2 starting gifts by choosing something else while making your character. Even with the Master Key, the Thief isn't meant for beginners. The Thief is a very hard class to start with, and I would only recommend this for experienced players. The Banner is next. The Bandit specializes on hard-hitting physical attacks and is great with weapons such as axes and straight swords. The starting battle axe is great for the game's early areas, where dealing with enemies in a few hits as possible is important. Their high endurance and strength will mean that of all classes they deal the most melee damage at the beginning of the game. The Bandit's armor isn't that good, but due to its high strength you'll have no trouble equipping armor and shields as you find them. The Bandit is relatively easy to use, but it's definitely not the easiest class to start with. I would only recommend this for semi-experienced players. Next class is the Hunter. These are a complete mix of combat styles, but this also means that the Hunter is not overly good at anything. Though the fact that they spawn with a bow and have respectable strengths means they can equip and use almost all early game weapons, makes up for this. Be careful using the bow though, because you won't be able to restock your arrows until you meet the first merchant, so don't waste them. Due to the low equip load, they can evade quickly. This also means they can't take too many enemy attacks. But due to their good mobility and great versatility, this is a great class for intermediate players who don't rely on magic. Next is the Sorcerer, and if you want to use magic as your primary weapon, then the Sorcerer is the strongest class in that respect. You start with one spell, Soul Arrow, and a dagger for weapons as a Sorcerer, but the dagger is basically useless. Soul Arrow will be your main weapon, but be careful though. Due to the nature of sorceries in Dark Souls, it will only have 30 casts before you have to go back to a bonfire and restock them. While the Sorcerer may have the most intelligence and attunement of all the starting classes, they also have the lowest vitality, so keep your distance away from most enemies. This high attunement will mean that you start with 3 attunement slots rather than 2 that most classes have. The Sorcerer is more suited for intermediate or experienced players who favour magic. If you're a beginner and want to use magic, then the next class will be your choice. Next up is the Pyromancer, my favourite starting class, combining both powerful fire magic with a decent melee weapon ability. As the Pyromancer, you start with a Pyromancer glove and a spell, Fireball, as well as a hand axe, which due to the high strength will deal plenty of damage. Spawning with the Pyromancer glove is a good bonus due to the fact that the other classes will have to go through almost half the game before they get theirs. The problem with these fireballs though is their low usage. You can only use them 8 times before you have to go back and restock at a bonfire. I would recommend using your axe to take out weaker enemies and then use the fireballs on the stronger ones. Due to the rounded nature of the Pyromancer skills, this is one of the easiest classes to start with and definitely one beginners should pick. The next class is the Cleric, a class based around on faith more than anything else, and thus has the highest faith of any class. There are other stats are fairly balanced, so you'll have plenty of freedom with weapon selection after a few levels up. This class, like the Knight, starts in the Covenant of the White. The Clerics, you also start with a miracle, Heal, which will allow them to get further without going back to a bonfire than other classes that just rely on Estus Flasks. The aim is to use Heal out of battle and the Estus Flasks in battle, because the heal has a long cast time and will leave you open to attacks. Clerics are a great class for beginners and intermediate players, looking for a warrior that relies on strength and faith. And finally, there is the Deprived, the hardest class to start with by far. This class is known by a lot of players as the professional class, and for good reason. Deprived only starts with a club and a plank shield for equipment, and has to find the rest of its armor. This lack of equipment will mean that you will not be able to take many hits as the Deprived. But there is one upside to this class. Starting off, the Deprived has all its skills leveled at 11, so the Deprived is not specialized in area, but it's also not lacking. This flat starting skills makes the Deprived a good slate to work off, and can get access to magic earlier than most classes. Even with that though, I would only recommend this for the best of players, as starting with this class is unforgivingly hard. And with that, this wraps up this video. My next video will be on the starting gifts. I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like, and goodbye!